the real lockdown. So we're in a lockdown, but there's actually a very more real lockdown that the enemy is trying to trap us and get us into. You can be free. You can be outside of a nationwide lockdown and still be under a spiritual lockdown. And so tonight I wanted to talk about a lockdown that is more scary, is more real, is more dangerous than the lockdown we're in right now. We looked at a guy last week named Joseph. And Joseph was a man who had big dreams. God had placed something big on his life to save not just one nation, but many nations. And every time something happened, it seemed like he was moving further and further away from the dream. It seemed like he had been forgotten, but he never compromised. He never chose to disobey God. He stayed with God. He clung to his relationship with God, and God raised him up. God blessed him. He honored him for that, raised him to be second in command of Egypt. But tonight, we're going to look at a guy who didn't follow that example of Joseph, who ended up living a life of a lot of compromise. And as a result, the enemy locked him down to a point where his life ended early and he never accomplished what he was called to. And I want to take us to the story of Samson. Now, many of you know the story of Samson and Delilah, this strong guy. When Samson was born, God had placed a massive calling upon his life to set the whole Israelite nation free. God gave him massive supernatural strength through his locks. He had long locks, long hair. And through that, God gave him this supernatural strength that enabled him to defeat Philistines without an army, which was unheard of, which was uncommon. But what happened was Samson started moving away from God. He started moving away from the wisdom of God. He started compromising. He started disobeying the word in certain areas. He started doing his own thing. And what happens is he becomes very sure of himself, very sure of his own strength. And he starts, he has an eye for women. He starts playing around with relationships. He starts playing around with women. He starts compromising. He becomes very sure of what God has placed on his life, of his strength. And one day he meets Delilah and he starts falling in love with her. And at first he probably thinks, I've got this under control. It feels so good. She's so gorgeous. It just feels so good. And he probably thinks, I could leave at any time. I've got this under control. Because when we sin, we're like, please don't tell me what to do. I know what I'm doing. I've got this under control. I can end this. I can leave this at any time I want. And this is what he thought. He thought, just like all those times I've defeated the Philistines, I'm in control. I've got this. Don't need to tell me what to do. God, I know what I'm doing. I'll leave when it suits me. And so what happens is the Philistines realize that Samson's falling for Delilah, that he has a weakness for her. And they start trying to use this weakness he has for Delilah. And they bribe Delilah to get him to tell his secret to her of what causes him to have such great strength, because now they are on the war path to defeat him, to take him down. You see, as Christians, a lot of times we're distracted. We're distracted with, does that guy or does that girl like me? We're distracted with, how dare you gossip about me? We're distracted with, oh my word, I'm so busy, I don't have time for church. We're distracted with so many things. And while we're distracted, while we're following what feels good for us, I'll come to church when I have time or when it suits me. While we're distracted with what makes us feel good or what's comfortable, the enemy is plotting ways that he can destroy us and take us down. He's trying to find our weaknesses in our distraction to completely destroy that. So Samson is so sure of himself, he's so distracted by this gorgeous Delilah that he can't even see the whole time the Philistines are trying to destroy him. Or maybe he saw it, but he was too distracted to really take notice of it. He probably thought, like I've defeated them before, I'll defeat them again. The problem was, there was a bit of a disease growing inside Samson, and that disease was sin. That disease was compromise. Very dangerous. If you think you're sinning and you're like, I'll change when I want to, it's just a little sin, or you choosing to disobey the word because it feels good, it's going to start destroying you and eating you from the inside out. And before you realize it's destroyed you, it will be too late. It will have already destroyed a lot. And so he is so distracted by Delilah. He's so distracted by his own desires and what he wants and what feels good, instead of being focused on the kingdom, instead of being focused on what really matters. And so while he's distracted, while he's having some fun and a good time with Delilah and spending time at her place, the Philistines the whole time are coming up with plots and ideas of ways they can destroy Samson. And so they go behind his back and they bribe Delilah. And they say to her, we need you to find out the secret, and you're only going to get this money if you find out his secret. And so she is like, this is a challenge, this is a deal that I cannot resist. And so she starts pushing and begging Samson to reveal his secret. And for the first few times, he's like, he tells her maybe a bit of a joke, he tells her a lie, and she tries them. And when she calls out the Philistines, saying, oh my word, Samson, the Philistines are here, he breaks everything and he destroys them, and she gets upset because he's lied to her. But after a while, she starts begging him, and the one day he gets so tired of her nagging, he tells her the truth, and he says, well, if you cut off my locks, my long locks, if you cut off my hair, I will lose my strength. And this time she can see he's told her the truth. And so she says to the Philistines, I know all the other times I've wasted your time, but this time I can see I've gotten him right where we want him. I have gotten his secret. And they hide. And she cuts off his hair, she cuts off his locks. And when she calls this time for the Philistines and says, Samson, the Philistines are here, he is locked down. He is bound up by these chains that are holding him back, and he cannot break free. And he was defeated. The man who God had originally designed and raised up to set the Israelites completely free from the Philistines had fallen and was handed over to the Philistines, was defeated. The Philistines end up using him as like a model, as a statue that they would display in their parties to all the Philistines to show how we defeated this mighty man. He ended up dying early, losing his life early, and he never delivered the people like God had called him to, because he allowed the enemy into his life through not following God, through compromise. He ended up being locked down and not being able to fight the enemy or break free from the enemy. And how many of us, we're like Samson, instead of seeking the will of God, because the will of God is boring, which it is not, because the will of God brings a way better life, it brings way more perfection. Even when we face trials, it brings way greater strength and victory, freedom from curses. But we don't want to seek the will of God or follow the will of God because it doesn't feel good, or because discipline is so uncomfortable, or because I want to sin, it brings so much pleasure, it brings so much fun. The problem is, while you're sinning, while you're having fun, which is fake fun, while you're following your own desires and pursuing your own will, slowly but surely the enemy is plotting. The enemy is finding some areas that he can get into your life, and slowly but surely there will be a day where the enemy will shout, or someone will shout, oh no, the enemy's here, and you'll try and break free. But you'll be completely locked down. You'll be bound by curses, bound by arguments that you gave the enemy a right to have on your life because of sin, because of compromise, because you disobeyed the word, because you removed yourself from God's protection. You'll be bound by strongholds of porn, or bound by strongholds of negative thinking, or bound by strongholds of dishonoring your authority, or bound by strongholds of stealing. And you thought you were in control. You thought you could break free every time. You were so sure of yourself. You had this. You knew what you were doing. But now you can't break free. You're stuck. And the enemy is in the room. And they're about to gouge out your eyes. They're about to take you to prison. You're about to have your life ended short. You're about to lose the influence or the legacy or the powerful, big, exciting plan and purpose God had on your life, because you allowed compromise into your life and you became so sure of yourself. And while you were distracted, the enemy was plotting. The enemy was taking over territory, and you couldn't even see it. Samson should have been a man that lived long, and he should have been a man that had a powerful legacy that even today we should be speaking about how Samson delivered the people. Yet we don't say that about Samson. We talk about how he lost his life because he fell in love with a woman that was ungodly, and he was distracted, and he became full of himself instead of actually becoming obedient to God and becoming full of God. And in 1 Peter chapter 5 verse 8, it says this in the TPT, the Passion Translation. It says this: be well balanced and always alert. Always be alert. Don't get distracted. Don't fall asleep and sit back and relax. Be awake. be alert, open your eyes, be looking, be on guard, because your enemy, there is only one enemy. Your enemy is not that person that stole your girlfriend or boyfriend. Your enemy is not that person that lied to you. You have one enemy, and this enemy is the worst enemy. He is the real enemy, because every single day he is plotting ways to steal, kill, and destroy your life. Like John 10 verse 10 says, it says, because your enemy, the devil, he roams around incessantly. He's roaming around, which means he's constantly moving around. He's constantly looking like a roaring lion, looking for its prey to devour. Every single day, he's moving around your family. He's moving around you. He's moving around people that you're trying to win to church. He's moving around South Africa. He's moving around humanity, constantly looking for people that he can devour. Devour means that you rip that thing apart. When a lion devours prey, it rips the prey apart. It doesn't go, oh, I'm sorry, I'm hurting you, let me kill you quick. He devours. He doesn't care how that thing feels. He wants to destroy it and rip it apart so that he can devour it and then it's gone, completely gone. And that is what Satan's doing. He's roaming around and he's looking for opportunities. He's looking for arguments that we're setting up against ourselves to sin and compromise, to enter and devour us. And if you look at Samson, that was not God's plan for Samson's life. God's plan for Samson was to live a life that was big and victorious, a life of legacy. But because Samson did not have his eyes focused on God, he allowed the enemy to devour him, to cut his life short, to make his life not as great and as powerful as God has intended it to be. And how many of us, because we're not listening to God, we're not listening to our authority, how many of us, because we're not making it a priority to do our quiet times in the morning and spend time with God, or we're not making church a priority, how many of us, because we're not obeying the Bible, or we only obey parts of the Bible that suit us, and the other parts of the Bible we excuse away and say, I'm just going to do my own thing. How many of us are allowing the enemy to destroy our families, or destroy from our lives, or steal things from our lives, or steal our purpose and our legacy and our victory, just because we don't want to listen, because we think that God's way is boring, or because we are distracted and we can't actually see what really matters? So just like the enemy is constantly roaming around looking for opportunities to devour, he is constantly setting up distractions. He's constantly setting up traps that will take our eyes off what really matters, that will take our eyes off God and cause us to justify disobedience or compromise, so that we can fall into traps of the enemy. He is setting traps for us so that we will ultimately be in a lockdown for the rest of our lives that we will not be able to break free from, or that will end our lives short. Why would we want to put ourselves in that situation? You see, sin and pleasure seem so fun, but its pleasure is a lie, because it's short lasting and the results it brings after is not worth it. But when we are in obedience, when we live in obedience, when we keep our eyes focused on God, when we stay focused on what really matters, when we cling to God like Joseph did last week, and we don't lose focus, we don't start following our own desires or what we think sounds right or what we feel like. See, the enemy is constantly roaming around. He's constantly looking for opportunities to destroy us, to steal from us, to devour us. He's constantly setting up traps. He's constantly setting up distractions to take our eyes off God, to take our eyes off purpose. So we have a choice. We can either be like Joseph that we looked at last week. We keep our eyes focused on God. We stay focused on what really matters. We don't depend on our own understanding, but we lean and trust and rely on God, and we cling to God. We stay in purpose, which will cause us to rise up to become all that God has created us to be, to live a life that is big, that is truly free and exciting, a life of massive purpose and legacy and victory. Or we can be like Samson. We can start getting distracted. We can start falling for the traps and distractions of the enemy. We can take our eyes off God. We can start following what we want or what we feel like. We can start following our feelings and desires, or what makes sense in our own eyes, instead of following the word. We can choose to compromise or be partially obedient to the word, but we will never gain from that. Sin only promises temporary pleasure. Sin promises the best pleasure, but the results after are so not worth it. And if you follow your own way or your own desires, if we take our eyes off God and we get distracted, we will live lives that are not as free as God intended us to be. We will live lives that are not as big, as massive, as victorious as God created us to live. And so, yes, God loves us, and yes, He can forgive us. But sometimes when we sin, we allow opportunities to get stolen from us. We allow ourselves to be robbed of blessings that we might not ever be able to recover from or get back. Look at Samson. God still loved him. God didn't look at him and went, oh, I'm tired of you, I hate you. But at the same time, Samson lost out on so much because he chose to follow his own desires, because he allowed himself to get distracted by sin. And as a result, he went into a real lockdown. A lockdown that he was never actually able to ever break out from or come out of. And so we need to stop doing what's right in our own eyes. We need to stop compromising and justifying our disobedience. We need to stop following out what makes sense to us in our own understanding and our natural sight. We need to learn to start trusting on God and start relying on Him. We need to learn to keep our eyes focused on Him and to focus on what really matters, not on temporary things. Because otherwise, we will end up in a real lockdown. We don't want to be in a lifelong, eternal lockdown. We want to live lives that even in the midst of the worst trial is a big life, is a free life, a truly free life of curses, of strongholds, of issues, because we have God. And when you have Jesus, it doesn't matter how much people try to trap you or imprison you, they can't. Because you are truly set free. You are truly free when you have God. And I want to end with this. It's beautiful. In Psalms 91 verse 3, in the translation, the Passion version as well, not the translation version, it says this: He will rescue you when you focus on God, when you live for God, when your eyes are on Him, on what really matters. He will rescue you from every hidden trap of the enemy. Satan is setting up hidden traps for you every day. God will rescue you from that without you even realizing it sometimes. And He will protect you from false accusation and any deadly curse. The enemy has tons of distractions, of traps, of deadly, destructive curses that he wants to place upon your life. God will protect you from those. If, like Joseph, you will hold on to Him, you will stay focused on Him, you will not get distracted, you will not follow your way, you will focus on what really matters.
War zone, taking in this pain, my whole belly holds on, I can't really stand, I can hear you walk past now, my heart starts to jump, my fears begin to fade, my faith explodes right now, I can't keep it in, there's a joy inside of me, you are holy, you are holy, you are holy, Jesus, let your blood be my fears and doubts, let your glory shine in my darkest night. I will hold my peace as you fight for me, and you bear my grief, let your spirit intercede. Let your spirit intercede. I have chosen you, not rejected you. Fear not, I'm with you, so do not be dismayed. I will strengthen you, I will uphold you with my righteous love. I call you by name. You are holy, you are holy, you are holy, Jesus. Let your blood restrain all my fears and doubts. Let your